Hi, welcome to the New Life Media team. Media has become a very important part of the contemporary church, so this team has been created to help produce high quality media for the use of New Life Church. This video is the first training video and provides some basic tips to help capture images in the auditorium. The auditorium at New Life Church can be a little tricky to photograph, as the environment is both low light, but also the lights that are there are constantly changing colour, intensity and direction. To help overcome this, I recommend you begin to shoot in manual mode on a digital SLR. This allows the selection of a number of settings required to produce a usable image. The settings we will look at include shutter speed, aperture or f-stop, the ISO and white balance. To adjust these, you may need to consult the user manual that came with your camera. To achieve a good exposure in an image, a balance between shutter speed, aperture and ISO must be found. The trick to low light shooting is to have the slowest shutter speed without too much motion blur, the largest aperture without too small a depth of field that the image is still in focus, and the highest ISO without too much grain. An overexposed image looks very white and is the result of too much light entering the camera. Likewise, an underexposed image is too little light entering the camera. First, we'll look at the shutter speed. This is the amount of time the shutter is open, allowing light to enter the sensor. If the shutter is open too long, then motion blur can creep into images. This is sometimes at a desired effect, but is often a distraction. The shutter speed is shown in fractions of a second, from 1/4000th of it down to 1/4, and then 0.3 of a second up to 30 seconds. Depending on the lens used, you will find that under about 1/60th you will start to struggle to hold the camera still freehand. Next we will look at the aperture. This relates to the size of the opening in the lens and is represented by an f number or f-stop. The larger the f-stop, the smaller the aperture and therefore less amount of light that can enter the lens. The smaller the f number, the larger the opening and therefore letting more light in. The lens is the limiting factor as to how large the aperture can go. A lens that has a large aperture, such as f2.8 or f1.4, is very fast lens and has the largest opening and lets the most light in. These lenses are also the most expensive. The aperture also controls the depth of field. This is the distance in front and behind the focus point. A small depth of field is achieved by a large aperture or small f number. This is used to achieve a blurred background in an image such as portraits where you want the main focus to be the face and not the background. The final part of the exposure triangle is the ISO setting. This number represents the sensitivity of the image sensor to light. The lower the number, the less sensitive, and of course the higher the number, the more sensitive the sensor is. However, there is a drawback to more sensitivity. This is grain or image noise. The grain is common at higher ISO settings and is usually desirable to avoid. In some situations, flash can help overcome low or coloured light by providing a bright white flash of light to help light the scene and freeze movement. However, in the auditorium this is not an option. First reason is that it is very distracting and our aim is to go unnoticed during the service. The second reason is due to the size of the room and distance away from the subject. The flash is not powerful enough to light the whole room. The final reason is when fired at smoke, the light from the flash picks up the smoke and results in a white haze over the image. The final setting we need to be aware of is the white balance. Different light sources have a different colour temperature. The human eye is very clever at automatically adjusting to allow for these different temperatures, but a digital camera isn't as clever. If you set the camera to auto white balance or AWB, this tells the camera to take the best guess at what the temperature is and adjust for it. Sometimes it gets it right, other times it gets it very wrong. The safest way to prevent images coming out with a real yellow or blue tint is to set a manual white balance. Modern digital cameras have a range of white balances preset to help with this, including flash, daylight, fluoro and tungsten to name a few. In the auditorium we have a number of coloured lights that consistently change colour and therefore colour temperature. I have found that most days flash, tungsten or fluoro provide the best results, so a few test images at the start usually determines which is required. During the preaching, the house lights are up, so the fluoro setting works best here. One final setting to note is you should always shoot at the highest resolution possible. This allows the image to be used for print at a later date. Even if you think it will never get printed, it's better to have the data saved and not need it than to have a great shot that can never be printed. Shortly we should have some church memory cards that can be borrowed for the service and leave at the info desk for BJ at the end. This way the images are at the church Tuesday morning ready for BJ to do up the notices for the following week. Thank you for your commitment and welcome again to the New Life Media team.